Okay, let's talk some books. So this week I am going to be sharing about, I guess, just some things that I have learned I do not like in the books that I read. So let me start with the book that I finished this week. I finished The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. And I'd like to get into a lot of details about all my thoughts on this, but I'm actually going to save it for the live show. So if you've been part of our Picture of Dorian Gray read along, or if you haven't, it's a read along that I was co hosting in the month of March with a couple of other YouTubers. And Saturday, March 30th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the year 2024, in case you're watching this way later, we will be doing a live show where we will be sharing all of our thoughts and discussing this book. So I will leave the information below, and then once that show is posted, I will come back and leave a link so you can go and see the recording of that. In the meantime, however, I guess all I'll say about this book was this was not the book that I was expecting it to be. I had heard that this was sort of a gothic novel. I had heard that this book was, full of horror and kind of creepy and really followed the life of Dorian Gray as his life became more and more questionable after sort of a deal with the devil kind of situation, if you will. And that's not the story that I just read. So what I'll do right now is I'll just tell you what, now having read the book, what I think this book is actually about. So the Picture of Dorian Gray, I would describe as being a psychological and philosophical character study of a young dandy, which is a young man who ends up being concerned only with his looks, his grooming, taking pleasure in life, and just doing his hobbies and the things that he enjoys. And it just really is a study of him and the people who surround him as he leans more and more into hedonism and the consequences of that on his soul and the lives of the people around him. I think there is also a really large theme in this book about nature and nurture that you could study, and I would recommend this book. I'll also say from the live show what my rating is, or you can go check it out on Storygraph. But I would say that while I do understand why this book is a classic, I don't know that it's a book that I would recommend to everyone. I think if you like books where the characters discuss philosophical topics, especially over dinner, then you will really like this book. If you really, really like character studies that sort of take a psychological look at why a character is doing what they do, then you will like this book. But if you're expecting a good gothic tale about, like, why people make good and bad decisions that's just super creepy and atmospheric, you're probably going to be disappointed. So keep that in mind. And yeah, it just goes to show that those rumors about classics aren't always true. So that was the only book that I finished in this past week. I'll now move on to what I am currently reading. So the first book I will discuss is The Arabian Nights. This is the Malcolm Lyons translation. I am making some good progress through this. In fact, I am currently on page 336. I read about 10 pages of this a day, usually while I am drinking my coffee in the morning. And then each week, I've just been sharing what my favorite story is or favorite situation that I've come across that week. So this week's story that I've really enjoyed is the story of, I believe it's Sharkin and Abriza, which is a Muslim prince and what turns out to be a female Christian princess. Um, I feel like who she actually is still kind of nebulous in my mind. But anyway, the story that I read takes place on night 46 and is still going on through night 51. And it's not quite an embedded narrative, which a lot of the stories in this book are. Anyway, with Sharkin and Obriza, I think the thing that I've enjoyed is just how they meet, which is they wrestle one another in a sort of like standoff champion competition, and they just have a very unique relationship. I can't even describe it. So that's been my favorite story so far. Like I said, it's not over yet. Their story kind of starts in this edition on night 46 and is still going on night 51, which is what I will be starting when I read tomorrow. The final tome that I am reading, or should I say mammoth, that I am reading for March is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clark. This is the second book that I have read by Susanna Clark. The first one was Paranesi, and Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell are about, at the end of the day, two musicians who have two very different ideas about what magic in England should look like. This is set in the 1800s, so Victorian age of England, where England is sort of come into its own right, and the English are very proud to be English and kind of skeptical of everybody else. This is a very long book. My edition is 846 pages long. I know there are some editions that go up to about 1,000 pages, so mileage may vary. But either case, they're all mammoths. And this is pretty good. I'll be interested to see how it ends, but I have to say that while I have heard this is slow paced, I don't know that that's really how I would describe it. I think I would actually say it's not very well paced. There are parts of this book that really grab me, and then I find myself flying through the pages. And then there are times where I just feel every single page of this book, and like it's one of the longest books I've ever read. And I think that's partially due to the nature of how it's written. This is a book that you will want to read if you like hearing a lot of details, and if you like tangents, and you like side stories and side quests and secondary characters. Um, the best equivalent that I can think of would be Victor Hugo's writing. He is really well known for going on tangents in the middle of a story that you feel like are then just barely related back to the main part of the story because he really just wanted to tell you about something. Only I feel like in the case of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, that sometimes it's really hard to figure out what the point of the side quest or side story was. But if you like books like Les Mis that have a really good main plot and then a lot of subplots and sub characters and tangents and really long battles where they're talking about Waterloo and you're wondering why and when will you ever get back to the actual story, and there are people who like that, you will like this book. It is loosely a fantasy. I would not say this is high fantasy. I would say there are magical elements to it, and there is magic going on. But I would also say that the majority of the magic in this book is all off page. So they're mentioning that magic has happened or has happened, which is probably more frequently. And there's very rarely mention of how, other than maybe that it's spoken, but you don't hear the words, you don't see it spoken. Maybe there's some mention of vague gestures being made, that kind of thing. So I would say it's very light on sort of the fantasy elements of it, though you will find, there's some non-human characters that come into play. So there are a lot of really interesting things I would say about the main plot of this book that I'm enjoying, but I'm not sure how I'll end up rating it. Okay, so this has just been the craziest recording. So I don't know if you heard my doorbell ring in the middle of that, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to cut it out, and I don't know what I was saying. So I was talking about Jonathan Strange. I'm pretty sure I wrapped up everything I had to say on it. But anyway, you'll get my full or the rest of my thoughts next week. So I have already started The Snow Child for April, and depending on when I finish this will determine whether it goes on my February or April TBR. We'll see. But I am enjoying this. I am about a third of the way through so far. It's been a pretty quick and interesting read. The Snow Child is about a couple named Mabel and Jack. They are living in the 1920s and have moved to very, very remote Alaska, which is pretty much all of Alaska at that point. And they live in a extremely remote town off a railroad and near a mining camp. And they have moved there to have a solitary life. They're in their, I think, 50s. And despite their desire, they have never managed to have children, which has sort of become a sore spot for them. And they're now at the point where they're just finding themselves drifting apart, getting older, and struggling to actually start their own homestead. And in the midst of all this, they suddenly one day start finding that there is a young girl of about 8 running around on their property. And there's a little bit more to it as to how she gets there, and I have no idea how things are going to work out. But Mabel is noticing that maybe there's some connection to this girl and a little fairy tale that she knew growing up. There are definitely some elements of magical realism in this book, and I'm looking forward to see how this continues along. That said, I'm kind of glad that I decided to start with this book because, one, it's definitely more winter than it is spring, and so I'm trying to make use of the fact that it's kind of still dreary and cold here. But two, I'm glad that I started this early because it's kind of a dark book, and not like dark as in scary, but dark as in like sad and depressing. The beginning of this book especially is just very, very like sad, dark, depressing winter kind of feel. Um, and I wasn't necessarily expecting that, even though I did know that the story kind of had to do with them struggling with their own childlessness. So I'm a third way through this. I am enjoying it. It's going well, and we'll see how I end up feeling about this when it's done. So that is it for this week, right? Yep, I don't see any other books to talk about. And yeah, I'll look forward to talking to you more next week about whatever I'm reading then, which will probably be the remainder of my April TBR. And let me know how things are going with you and what you are currently reading. And I'll talk to you next time.